Most towns in America have a beginning, a middle, and if they're unlucky, a slow, quiet end. But this place took slow and said, "Hold my shovel." We drift over a cracked Pennsylvania roadway, fractured like broken glass. Wisps of smoke leak from narrow seams in the asphalt, curling into the morning air. The sound is nearly nothing, just a faint hiss, like the earth itself is exhaling. This is Centralia, a town sitting on top of a fire that's been burning for over 60 years and counting. Down there, beneath the ground, the temperature can climb to over 1,000 degrees. Toxic gases drift through old mine shafts like ghosts that miss their cue. And the fire? It doesn't care what's on the surface anymore. Honestly, most towns die from bad economies or shrinking populations. Centralia died because someone lit the trash and accidentally lit the whole town. Just imagine explaining that to future historians. Ah yes, the Great Trash Fire of '62, a truly landmark moment in Americans' decision-making. But before Centralia became a modern ghost town with smoking streets and legends whispered by tourists, before sinkholes opened without warning, and before everyone left, it was a normal place, a good place. And that part of the story matters too. Before the fire, Centralia looked like any other coal town tucked into the Pennsylvania hills. A little rough around the edges, sure, but full of life in all ways that mattered. We drift through a warm 1960s summer afternoon. Kids pedal bikes down the main street. Men in soot-stained work clothes spill out of the main entrance, laughing loud enough to drown out the machinery. Church bells ring in the distance. Someone's cooking something with way too much onion. You know, a town. The people here were proud of their roots, deep roots, the kind carved into the earth by generations of miners who knew every coal seam like its family. For them, the town wasn't just home. It was a living, breathing thing. Of course, it also had its quirks, like the annual debate about who made the best pierogi and whether the high school mascot should really still be the Mules. But quirks are the heart of a small town. They're what makes it memorable. One resident, let's call him Tommy Rourke, would later say the whole town felt solid, like the ground beneath their feet would last forever. He wasn't wrong about the town being memorable, just maybe not in the way that he hoped. Every disaster has an origin story. Some involve greed, corruption, natural causes. Centralia's a landfill. We glide over the town's old strip mine pit on a warm May morning in 1962. A handful of volunteer firefighters stand around the enormous trash pile. Broken furniture, old tires, household junk. Talking about the quickest way to clean it up before Memorial Day. Spoiler alert, they chose the wrong one. They lit the garbage on fire. Nothing unusual for the time, except this particular landfill sat on the top of an abandoned mine, a coal mine, and buried deep beneath those tunnels, a coal seam, just waiting for a little encouragement. As the trash burned, the flames crept downward through the cracks in the ground, tiny gaps that acted like a welcome mat for a fire looking for a long-term home. Once it reached the seam, the coal ignited, and the real problem began. Coal, unlike garbage, doesn't burn out quickly. It smolders, it creeps, it tunnels through the earth like a slow-motion serpent of heat and gas, and once it's deep underground, putting it out becomes nearly impossible. By the time the landfill fire was extinguished and the smoke finally cleared, the underground had already begun its long, unstoppable crawl. A spark had become a secret inferno, and Centralia had no idea yet. Once the smoke kept drifting back weeks after the landfill cleanup, the town finally realized something was wrong. Something underground was still burning. We shift to a series of historical attempts, each one well-intentioned, but less successful than hoped. First came the quick fix. Local crews tried flushing the mine tunnels with water. This worked for about 5 minutes, which, by government standards, is practically a victory parade. Then state officials stepped in. Engineers drilled boreholes, hoping to map exactly where the fire was. Problem was, the fire didn't care about their map. Coal seam fires don't move in straight lines. They move to wherever the oxygen leads them. So by the time the drilling finished, the fire had already slipped into new tunnels. Next came the big plan, to flood the entire network of mines with slurry mixture. expensive, complicated, and requiring quick action, so naturally it stalled in committee. By the time the funds were approved, winter had set in, and the project collapsed under inflated costs and bureaucratic confusion. Go figure. It was no one person's fault, but also everyone's. Meanwhile, the fire kept spreading quietly through the old mining veins beneath the town. Residents reported strange warmth under their feet, basements filled with smoke at odd hours. Centralia hadn't yet entered full crisis mode, but the clock was ticking. As the fire crept deeper into local coal seams, Centralia began to change, slowly at first, then all at once, like a town morphing into something unrecognizable. We glide over front porches and quiet streets where nothing looks wrong, until you notice the thin threads of smoke slipping through the grass. The earth isn't burning on the surface, it's breathing. Basements grow warm, even in winter. Metal doors sweat from the heat. Some residents report a faint humming sound beneath their homes, like distant machinery. Others swear that air tastes metallic. It's never a good sign when your laundry room feels like it's built on the top of a sauna, powered by Lucifer. Jeez. This wasn't imagination. The underground fire released carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, which traveled through abandoned shafts and cracks in the earth. Some homes had to be briefly evacuated. Pets acted strangely, refusing to walk on certain parts of the yard where the ground was unusually hot. Locals began trading stories. The smoke comes and goes like the town's got lungs. The ground rumbled last night. It felt like the earth was rolling over in its sleep. The mines aren't empty anymore. The legend started here, long before the sinkholes and the government buyouts, because when a town begins to breathe, people can't help but wonder what else might be waking up down below. For nearly 2 decades, Centralia lived with the fire, uneasily, stubbornly, and with more courage than most towns could muster. But in 1981, the fire finally made itself impossible to ignore. We moved to a chilly February afternoon. Snow is melting into muddy patches. The ground looks solid. But it isn't. 12-year-old Danny Harper, name changed obviously, was walking in his grandmother's backyard when the earth gave way beneath him. One moment he was running across the grass, and the next, the ground opened up like a trap door. He dropped into a steaming void more than 40 feet deep, and the walls crumbling around him, the air thick with toxic fumes rising straight from the mine fire below. The temperature was scorching, hot enough to sear the edges of the sinkhole. Danny clung to a tree root, screaming for help, barely conscious from the fumes. His cousin, standing nearby, acted fast, grabbing the boy's arms and pulling him out seconds before the ground collapsed further. Scientists later confirmed what the town feared. The sinkhole had formed because the mine fire had hollowed out the earth directly beneath the yard. The soil above was nothing but a thin shell waiting to crumble. There are bad days, and then there are the ground tried to eat me because of an underground apocalypse days. The incident made national news. Officials could no longer pretend the fire was contained, predictable, or even harmless. It was alive, spreading, and silently reshaping the town from beneath. After the sinkhole incident, Centralia was no longer just a local problem. It became a federal one. We moved to a Stark meeting hall where officials gather clipboards, maps, mineral surveys spread across tables. The mood is grim. Even the coffee looks like it doesn't want to be there. Experts confirmed the truth. The underground fire had grown too large, too unpredictable, and too expensive to extinguish. It could burn for decades, maybe centuries. So in 1984, the government approved a relocation program. Families were encouraged, then pressured, to leave. Buyouts offers arrived in the mail like eviction notices delivered by the earth itself. Homes that once held generations were suddenly condemned. Windows were boarded up, schools were closed, streets emptied. Neighborhoods went quiet, too quiet. Imagine walking past 20 houses and seeing only one porch light, still glowing, because someone inside refused to give up. Some folks said the town looked like it was halfway through a zombie apocalypse. Others said that was generous. One by one, families packed their lives into moving trucks and left Centralia behind. Not because they wanted to, but because the ground beneath them no longer wanted to stay in one piece. By the late 1990s, most of Centralia was gone, faded, empty. A whole town erased, not by war or famine, but by a fire no one could reach. Not everyone left. Some refused, quietly, firmly, and with the kind of stubbornness you only find in small towns and on mule farms. We drift through the nearly empty streets of Centralia in the late 1980s and 1990s. Dozens of houses stand silent, windows dark, but here and there, a porch light glows, a curtain moves, life flickers. A handful of residents challenged the state. They argued that the danger was exaggerated, that the government had mishandled the crisis, that this was their home and no fire was going to tell them otherwise. One older man, let's call him Frank Mallory, claimed he'd lived through 3 mine closures, 2 floods, and 1 suspicious church potluck. An underground fire, he said, put it on the list. But beneath the jokes, their resolve ran deep. These people had ties to Centralia stronger than any evacuation order. Family graves, generations of memories, roots that no amount of steam or sulfur could soften. At night, the remaining residents watched the glow of distant vents painting faint orange halos in the fog. They mowed lawns no one would ever see. They mailed letters from a post office with almost no customers. They lived in a town that was disappearing around them, but they refused to disappear with it. Legal battles stretched on for years. Eventually, the state allowed the final residents to stay for the rest of their lives, with the understanding, though, that their homes would revert to government ownership afterwards. They stayed anyways, because some people don't need a full town to feel at home, just a front porch, a familiar breeze, and a bit of ground that still remembers their footsteps. When a town turns into a smoking, half-abandoned wasteland, you can bet people are going to start telling stories. In Centralia, it practically invited them. We ease into a twilight scene, mist drifting over cracked roads, steam rising in little curls, the air heavy with that eerie metallic scent. Perfect conditions for legends to stretch its legs. Some stories were harmless, like the one about the singing vents, where steam escaping from cracks supposedly sounded like distant voices. Locals said it wasn't ghosts, just the earth complaining about the heating bill. Others leaned darker. Travelers claimed to see glowing shapes through the fog, heat flares that reflected off the smoke, but mistaken for wandering spirits. A few insisted the fire was spreading faster than scientists admitted, or that it just opened gateways to something deeper, older. Because nothing says fun weekend getaway like a possible portal to the underworld under a rural Pennsylvania town. And then there were outsiders' myths, the urban explorers, thrill seekers, amateur ghost hunters who arrived with cameras and big imaginations. They found abandoned houses, quiet streets, and steam rising from vents, and filled in the blanks with whatever stories got the most clicks. But beneath all the exaggeration, there was something undeniably strange about Centralia. The silence, the heat, the absence of a town where a town should be. Sometimes legends grow, not because they're true, but because the truth feels unbelievable enough on its own. More than 60 years after the spark that changed everything, Centralia is no longer a town in the traditional sense. It's a landscape shaped by absence, quiet, open, half returned to nature. We move across rolling hills where houses once stood, porch steps that lead to nothing, driveways ending at empty space. The ghosts here aren't people. They're foundations. Only a handful of residents still remain, allowed to live out their lives here long after legal battles. Most of the street grid is still visible, but the homes are gone. Trees and brush have taken back the lots. Wildflowers grow where gardens used to be. The fire itself still burns underground, deeper now, farther from where it started, but very much alive. Heat vents continue to rise through cracks in the overgrown earth, carrying sulfur and carbon dioxide with them. On cold mornings, the steam curls upward like pale ribbons, reminding everyone that the fire is still there, still moving, still breathing. Tourists sometimes show up expecting a post-apocalyptic wasteland. They usually leave surprised. It's not dramatic, it's not flaming, it's not cinematic. It's just oddly quiet. A town paused mid-sentence. Graffiti Highway, the once colorful, heavily painted stretch of abandoned road, was finally closed and covered for safety. But the legend of it lives online. and thousands of photos that made Centralia look like a neon art project cooked on low heat. Today, Centralia is a reminder, not of tragedy alone, but of how the earth can reshape a community in slow motion, how a single mistake can echo for generations, and how sometimes nature doesn't reclaim a place with vines and storms, but with silence, heat, and time. When you stand here today, on a quiet stretch of cracked Pennsylvania ground, it's hard to imagine the town that used to be here. The laughter, the lights, the rumble of trucks headed to the mine, all replaced by a thin whisper of steam rising from the earth. Centralia didn't vanish overnight. It faded, slowly, like an old photograph left in the sun too long. Not destroyed by war or drought or some grand disaster, but by a fire no one could touch and no one could outrun. Most towns worry about potholes. Centralia had bottomless, steamy voids that tried to swallow small children. Perspective is everything. The fire still burns beneath the hills, maybe for decades more, maybe longer. And above it, the quiet remains, a reminder that the strangest stories often come from places we barely notice on a map. The town, undone by a spark, yet unforgettable because of everything that came after it. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more Truth-ish, where things are mostly true and always strange.